Hi, everybody. This is Adrian Ledwin hosting the meeting, sitting in for Tasha, who couldn't be here today. So this is the bi-weekly meeting of the Multi-Tenancy Working Group, although we actually ended up skipping all of September due to either lack of agenda or short work weeks. So we have a light agenda today. The only thing is just an update from all of the projects that are being actively worked on by the Multi-Tenancy Working Group. And so those three projects are going to be HNC, which is an update that I will give. And then we will have Jim talking about multi-tenancy benchmarking and Faye talking about virtual clusters. After that, I can see a few more people are popping on. After that, if there are any open, we can open this up as a roundtable, and failing that, we can go back and do more work. So with that said, why don't I give a quick update for HNC, the hierarchical namespace controller. So we have released HNC 0.5.3, which I am hoping will be the final release on the 0.5 branch. So 0.5 has been basically the first real release of HNC. It's the first one where we felt like we had a decent feature set, a relatively stable API, and reasonably good performance and behaviors. And so I think 0.5 first came out in, I believe it was June. And ever since then, about once a month, we have been giving it a patch update, usually not changing behavior that much, but we have actually changed some fairly significant pieces of behavior. Let me just bring up the list of changes that we made over the last little while. So as I said, I'm hoping that this will be the last update because Ichi has been working, who many of you know, Ichi has been working very hard on the upgraded API. So we started, as many projects do, with V1 Alpha 1. We got a bunch of reviews on that to make it more sort of Kubernetes style compliant. And so we've been working hard on implementing that. And so we're hoping to release that by the end of this month, and that will be the 0.6 release. 0.6 will not be exactly backwards compatible with 0.5. You'll have to update your client tools. However, we are building features that will automatically take all of your existing objects on your cluster from the old API and immediately upgrade them to the new API for you without any intervention. So you don't have to recreate everything. So what we've done in the last release is we've added support for crew. So crew is a standard way to download and install plugins for your kubectl command line. And so the HNS, hierarchical namespace plugin, which is part of HNC, is now supported via crew. And we have made a couple of bug fixes. So for example, you weren't able to delete subnamespaces if there were propagated objects in them. It took us a surprisingly long time to notice this, but that was a very quick and easy fix once we discovered it. Probably the more significant change and the most significant change in this release was that if there were conflicting objects between parents and children, they were propagated inconsistently. And what we've done now is we've added the rule that if there is a conflicting object in a parent and a child, the parent will overwrite the child. However, we've also added a bunch of webhooks that prevent you from accidentally creating a conflicting object in a parent so that nothing ever gets overridden. So as long as the webhooks are always working, you can never overwrite your own data. But if somehow you manage to bypass the webhooks, let's say you installed a bunch of stuff and that while HNC was disabled and then turned it back on again, this will actually overwrite the existing objects because we felt that having guarantees on the consistency of policy application was more important than preventing data loss in this case. And so this was all discussed on the Slack channel through design docs. Let's see, we also added support for Kubernetes 1.19 and a couple of minor other corner cases. So yeah, as I said, I am hoping that this will be the last the last release on the 0.5 branch, and I'm hoping to see a release candidate of 0.6 out in about 2 weeks with a final version of 0.6 coming out soon after that. As I said, the only major change we're expecting in 0.6 is the new API. We may have a sort of experimental or possibly even alpha release of a new feature called exceptions, where you can where instead of objects being propagated to all descendants as they are today, you can limit which namespaces in the subtree that they go to by using label selectors. So for example, you can say, well, I would like this resource quota policy to be propagated to all child namespaces except that one. And then you can exclude that one and add your own resource quota that has let's say, a higher limit. So this gives administrators more control over how they create their policies and how they propagate them throughout their cluster. And so Jenny, who some of you may have, if you're watching the pull request, Jenny has been contributing to HNC all summer, and so she's working on that feature right now. So yeah, that is what is going on, plus the regular kind of stability and testing enhancements that come along with any growing project. So before we go on, any questions about HNC right now?
So Adrian, a few things. So first you mentioned crews. Crew? Is that, am I
Crew.
Huh?
Yes. That is K-R-E-W.
K-R-E-W. So you said you can use that to install plugin. I haven't tried that. So.
Yeah, right? It's very cool. Crew is it's developed by one of the SIGs. I imagine SIG, like the CLI SIG, and as soon as the blog post on HNC went out, which got something like 14,000 reads, which was pretty nice. This was in August. As soon as that went out, the maintainer of Crew contacted me and said, hey, you should be able to download this. So it's very nice. It auto-detects if you are on Linux or Mac, and it installs the correct plugin. We haven't built a Windows plugin yet, but we will if there's demand. And so, yeah, whether it will download and install it for you, you can uninstall it as well. It only supports one version at a time. You can't ship multiple versions on Crew at once. So basically, as soon as we release 0.6 with a new API, you'll only be able to use Crew to get the latest plugin. But the old way of doing it, which is just downloading the binary and installing on your path, that's still available as well. And we've updated our build process to automatically generate all of the artifacts required by Crew.
So where do you store your plugin binary actually? In GitHub or? Oh, so sorry, in Docker? In Docker Hub?
So the binaries are just stored on GitHub, as they always are. They're just artifacts of the release. So for example, if you go to the release, I can actually show you. Let's see. Can everybody see the 0.5.3 release?
I can.
Yeah. So if you scroll right down to the bottom, you can see we've got quite a lot of instructions up here. You get all of the artifacts. So this is the YAML file that you can use to install it on your cluster. This right here, this is the tar file that contains both Mac and Linux, as well as the license file. And this is what is used by Crew. And so Crew itself is, they distribute their plugin through a different repo. And so basically I have checked in a YAML file that points to this file in their repo. And whenever you say Crew install or Crew update, the first thing it does is it clones that repo locally, downloads this tar file, and then extracts the correct files for your platform, which it auto detects.
Okay.
But if that's not working, you can feel free to download these files, rename them to remove the suffix, and as long as they're anywhere in your path, that will work as well. But Crew is very nice because it puts them in like in a hidden directory, and it can install them and uninstall them and update them as you wish.
I see. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, because that related to VC, we are trying to, if you see one of the issues, we are trying to move the VC CTL to a Kubi CTL plugin that is more formal. This is our plan actually.
Yeah, I can certainly share with you some of the work that we've done there. It's not actually part of the 0.5 build process, but on the trunk actually, whoops, that is not what I meant to do. If you look at the trunk, oh, no, the mouse here. Yeah, there we go. Okay. If you look at our cloud build oh no, sorry. We show exactly how you can generate the YAML file expected by crew. So here you can see it's part of our HNC hack directory. And this is the YAML file that actually gets, it gets modified to have the correct, for example, the correct image, the SHA-256, a link to the correct download repo. And this is what drives all of crew. And then our new build process actually fills this all in and will include this as one of our artifacts. And then your only role is to download that file and then submit that as a PR to the crew index.
I see.
So I can show you how to, we can talk about that when you are ready to go.
Yeah. Good. I think good to know. So I think I can go to the crew and which help us to upgrade. So I was always wondering if we, develop a plugin, how does the user, keep track of the newest version for that plugin for every installation? That's not very
exactly. Yeah, and crew is the kind of accepted way to do that.
Okay, great. So another thing is, so yeah, at this stage, I think both of our projects, at least I think HNC VC is kind of much not 100% mature, but what is the progress of moving to another independent repo for you guys?
So for us, the main blocker there is the API, is implementing the new API. And also we're getting a code review and a security review from, I forget which SIG it is, but basically Multi-Tenancy and a few other folks are giving us a review. Once we pass the code review, once we pass the API review, then we can, then we'll be in a better position to get our own repo. So really we've been focusing on the API because that's the long pole. I've gotten some early code review comments from Mike, and I think we're going to save those till 0.7 at this point, because they're not hard, but they, moving files around and is always a little bit annoying.
Oh, so 0.6 won't be able to address all of the comments?
I don't think so, just because we have limited bandwidth, and I want to get 0.6 out the door. If we waited a bit longer, we could. So in 0.6, we're going to finish the API, and then in 0.7, that will probably be the point at which we're ready to look for our own repo.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I don't have other questions related to HNC.
Okay. Thanks, Faye. Anything else for me before we go on? And given that Faye's already been talking, maybe we can go to VC next. But before that, any other questions for hierarchical namespaces? Hearing none, why don't we go on to Faye? So Faye, do you want to give us an update on VC?
Yeah, so in VC side, I mean, the VC in upstream version, we have two major parts. One is the syncer part. The second is the tenant master lifecycle management, which is a VC manager. I think syncer part is pretty mature now. So there is one, which I think is very important enhancement for the syncer is now we support file sharing. Not exactly, code is about 90% complete. Now is, so the idea is even though you have, each tenant is given a dedicated name, API server, but syncer is a central hub. So for the syncer worker queue, it still accepts the request from all the tenants, masters. There's potentially that because worker queue is a FIFO queue, so there's potentially there is contention in that FIFO queue level. So now just in the past, a few weeks ago, now we implement the file sharing in the syncer worker queue. Now it support round robin. It's actually is a weighted round robin algorithm. So but by default, each tenant has the same weight. So we don't play with the weight as now, but the algorithm support different weight. So now it's kind of when we serve the reconcile request from the tenants masters, now it can go with the round robin order. So to avoid any starvation and priority inversion kind of thing, which I think is a major enhancement for the syncer to support, SIL kind of thing. Which, so if we finish this picture, now is you can see The tenant master has, isolated environments in terms of both, control plane and also the performance wise. They have kind of guarantee when, even if you have multiple tenants are actively sending read or read is cached in tenant master, most likely is the right either creation or update. Those operations will be populated in a more fair way. That is functionality wise, that is a major upgrade for VC Syncer. The second part.
What was driving those requests? Like that was, or that feature, was that based on your own internal usage, or?
Okay, now we don't have real usage to drive this, but in theory you have the power arm for sure, because I can make up the micro benchmark to illustrate the power arm. I have one tenant master keep generating 5K QPS for the Syncer. That's just keep upgrade. And another one you just generate one. So there's easily you can create a case you have a kind of starvation. That one there's one request need to wait another 5,000 requests get finished until it gets Syncer. So micro benchmark wise, we can make up the case. A real use case, not really, until you hit the tenant master really hard. At this moment, even our production is not that hard at this moment. But in theory, we just fix a potential problem, which can get attacked by any any people say you still have a weak point in your design. Yes, I have to admit, yes, we have a weak point. We just want to fix that weak point at this moment.
Okay. Cool. Anything else from you, or?
Yeah. Another part is the VC manager part, which because we are also thinking about the thing is how to move this the VC Intel project to the SIG repo. We probably have to go through a different round other than you guys do, which you go through the figure of. We are thinking maybe we should do another way, which we enhance the tenant master management using the class API style.
I was thinking the same thing, yeah.
So now we are working with Apple. Chris maybe is out sick today. We are trying to make that happen to get bounce from the SIG class API. So because now class API has all the differential things is nowadays the class API focus on providing your entire cluster, including node resource. There are quite a bunch of things about provision machine. In our case, we are trying to propose a new kind of class API only create master component, like API server, not nodes, basically. That is a major use case and for our multi-tenancy solution. So that's probably a new thing that we are currently trying to completely revise the way that we create tenant master. So that is our plan. And we hope after design that, we should present this to SIG class API to see the feedback. Eventually, I wish now the thing is the project will looks like a little bit weird in the sense that okay, it's a class API project, but that components is only useful in multi-tenancy context. So I will put the Syncer part in that repo to leverage the class API thing. That's probably easy to get accepted by class API. That's my thought.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's certainly worth having the discussion with them and seeing where that goes.
Yeah, so
it is a type of multi-cluster.
It's type of multi-cluster, yeah, without nodes. So it looks a little bit weird, but we need to clarify all the concept of this. So in reality, the actual use case is for VC is the best use case for VC. I mean, other than that, maybe nobody else want to create so many tenant masters without nodes. So right. So
yeah, it's interesting. Certainly you could use the kind of Kubernetes as a control plane idea. Would be another.
Yeah, I think some other use cases is that you create many control plane and you install virtual Kubernetes. That's one way that I can think of.
Agreed.
Yeah. Other than that is VC definitely is the best fit. Yeah, is slightly narrow scope for this. I hope, Cross API guys will like this. So yeah, I think Chris has some initial conversation with them. We are just working on some design docs to push forward for that.
Sounds good. I had a question or two if you're finished, or
Yeah. That's all at this moment. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, the question I had was that I've been seeing some like there seems to be more activity heating up just like in the community about multi-tenancy. And some of them are kind of like in the sort of tenant CRD HNC area, like Capsule and Loft and what's the latest one I saw? Angel was here to talk about that a couple of weeks ago. The name escapes me right now.
Kate Spin is the other one.
K-Spin, thank you, K-Spin. And so I've been talking to Angel about possibly joining forces on some of that stuff. And I've also seen that there's at least one other kind of implementation of the virtual cluster idea. Faye, have you reached out to have you looked into those other projects? Do you know what the differences are?
Is the Loft one?
It may be Loft. Yeah, Loft was up to was doing a couple of things.
It is a Loft. So Loft is kind of the PaaS platform. So the underlying technique, they call it virtual cluster.
And is it a similar idea to your virtual cluster?
Idea is similar, but idea is if the idea can be as simple as give each tenant a dedicated control master component. That is the idea, right? Mm-hmm. This is similar, but the implementation is different. My current interpretation about that, based on the documents, based on the architecture design doc, I think they work more like a K3V, if you remember. K3V.
Not so much, I'm afraid.
The Rancher guys created K3V. If I think Rajit mentioned last year actually. So basically last year we proposed in the virtual cluster that after a few months the Rancher has a K3V implementation. So idea-wise the same thing, but the implementation are different. I can give some key differences here, but since I didn't see their code, so I don't know the exact difference. Concept-wise, first they don't use a centralized sinker. They use each tenant has an individual sinker. That's number one. Number two is they don't exactly like we did things like we have a one-to-one matching between the tenant namespace and the supermaster namespace. They group all the tenant objects into one supermaster namespace. So the namespace-wise, there is no one-to-one mapping between tenant and the super, which I think is a problem. Because basically all the tenant objects when they sync to the super, the namespace is the namespace organization is completely changing. There's only one. So, which means within a tenant master, per namespace feature like network policy kind of thing doesn't work.
I see.
I believe it can break quite some compatibility.
So I think where I was going with this is that does it make sense for you to reach out to the law folks and say like, hey, should we join forces? Should instead, because I know that they're selling a lot more than just a virtual cluster, just like K-Spin is selling a lot more than just hierarchical namespaces. Does it make sense for them to adopt our VC and maybe contribute to it when they need a feature that's not there, as opposed to going it on their own, fully on their own?
I'm not. So this part, I actually don't know quite because they are a commercial company. They sell it. So I don't know if there. I mean, I don't have any problem they use VC, but I just don't know. Maybe I'm not quite familiar with this process. If there is a commercial company is selling a project, is that okay to ask them to use upstream or?
Well, I thought, I'm just looking on my phone to see if I'm correct. I thought that at least some of their stuff was I thought that at least some of their stuff was open sourced. If that's incorrect, then maybe that doesn't make a difference. But I thought they had a GitHub repo.
Yeah,
There
isn't
it
it
is.
the same team that also released Kiosk? So I think they built
Yeah.
Loft as an add-on on top of Kiosk just for creating multiple clusters, right?
Hmm. Yeah, so I think that's the thing is like we don't care if they're commercial or not. I mean, yeah, most of us are. Um, all we care, I believe, is if the code is Apache 2 licensed.
Right.
Um, and so given that, if they are, it might be worth so given that they have something that kind of intersects with both of our products, maybe Faye, you and I should reach out to them at some point together and say like, hey, you seem to be doing a lot of the same stuff that we're doing. Does it make sense to join forces? Because what they then get is that they can claim, oh yeah, their standards compliant, plus they get the benefit of all of our work. What we get is their user base and any additional contributions that they are willing to make or that they need to make for their customers. So I think that it could be, as long as the models are sufficiently compatible, this could work well. I mean, obviously, I don't know if it will until we look at it, but does that sound, Faye, maybe you and I can coordinate on that?
Yeah. So basically, there, as I mentioned, the biggest difference what I mentioned is they don't do the one-to-one mapping for the namespace. I don't know if there's any other theory behind that. There is other reasons they have to do that. So besides that, I would say the same thing. There's no difference.
Yeah, exactly. So, and if they're not wedded to that idea, if that's just what they started with, perhaps they're willing to change it. Especially if there's a good reason not to do it, which they hadn't thought of.
So you know that guy, right? I think I know that guy.
I don't think I've spoken to anyone from Loft, although I'm starting to lose track. I need to go back and double check.
Yeah, they publish quite some the post in the Medium, in the Medium and the Newsstack kind of thing. I think we can get this contact person if you would like. So they use agency. I don't. They
don't use agency, but they have something. They have a concept of self-serve namespaces that is overlap somewhat with what agency does. So I think it would certainly be useful to get them to start joining this group and talking about like if there is some reason why the projects that we are building is not suitable for their customers. That would be useful, I think, feedback for us. Okay, so I don't want to take up too much more time on this, but Faye, I'll contact you on Slack, and then maybe we can email them together.
We can try to reach them to see if we can talk about this.
Yeah, it'd be good if they want to come present at one of our sessions, right? So maybe they can talk about both of their projects.
Exactly. Yeah, that sounds good. Okay.
Faye, I did have one question. You mentioned something about network policies. I didn't quite understand. You said there was like I guess as you were talking about Loft, you said.
I just make up a use case. For example, the tenant can create a network policy in tenant master. So, but network policy, you have to specify the namespace.
Okay.
So if you keep the one-to-one mapping between the tenant namespace and the super namespace, then once one sync the tenant, the network policy object to the super, you still can guarantee that network policy only work on the specific namespace, although the name has been changed, but logically the same namespace. So the path although the namespace is changed, but logically the path ownership is not changed, right? Only this path belongs to this namespace. So network policy still work basically because the network policy. But if you get rid of the namespace mapping, you only have one namespace in the super master.
Okay.
The network namespace doesn't work because everybody is in the same namespace in the super master where the path actually run.
Sure. So that's just more of a limitation of namespaces based virtualization versus.
No, I just make up one use case. I can try to think of other case.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to come up with that classification for what you can and cannot do with namespaces-based virtualization versus, you know, the virtual cluster concept, right?
Uh, I don't think, I think namespace virtualization is like case beans, like more like a namespace virtualization, because they are actually doing exactly virtual cluster, but only in, because if you look at the API that they provide to the customer, it's a full cluster. It's not namespace.
Okay.
So they are going with the virtual cluster based virtualization. The only problem is that, I mean, so the interface wise, our approach and their approach are the same because they give the people the virtual cluster. The only thing what I worry is the implementation wise, right? Implementation, they have the syncer, we have the syncer. So the syncer may do it differently. What I see the biggest difference is they don't directly sync the namespace. I don't know what's the reason behind that, because to me it is more nature to directly sync namespace than not do that.
And when you say namespace, you mean a namespace that's on the host, like on the supermaster, not on the.
Yeah. I think it's much easier to just sync it. But they choose not to sync it. Maybe they have some reason, which I don't know.
So
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm
looking at the architecture right now, and I mean, to me, it seems like they more or less kind of have like a tiller type thing that is just a federated CLI that you authenticate with its own RBAC, and they separate it. It's kind of like a tiller with the OpenShift is kind of what the architecture looks like, and then a nice UI on top of it. So that's why they do a namespace per, and their nested namespacing seems still to revolve around kind of a namespace per cluster, and their virtual cluster is a namespace from their docs. It looks like.
Yeah, I thought it was namespaces based too. So, but I haven't looked into much detail.
I thought they had both. I thought they had like within one cluster you can have self-service namespaces, plus you can get virtual clusters if that is not enough for you.
So the self-service namespace provisioning says that, I mean, at least on their docs, it says that it's from their Loft CLI, which to me, looking at that, and then they have a Loft extension API server, it seems to me like you just authenticate with CLI and then it'll basically federate out to create you a namespace if you're authorized, is kind of what it seems like.
Yeah, but that namespace is not in a virtual cluster, correct? That namespace is on the real cluster.
From what I see, it doesn't seem like that, but you know, I'm just looking at their docs and stuff, so I'm not an expert.
Okay, let's ask them to come and give a presentation, because certainly they could be covering the same territory that we're covering.
Right.
Okay, anything else on VC, or should we move to MTB?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
All right. Adrian, if you can give me screen sharing, I'll just pull up the repo and also walk through some of the.
Let's see, do you have screen sharing now? Okay.
Yep, popped up. All right, so just, you know, kind of quick updates. So from on the benchmark side, what we did is we moved, so much like Adrian was describing with HNC, we also have a crew plugin. So it's kubectl MTB. So you can, you know, if you go into the multi-tenancy benchmarks project and click on the link for running the conformance tests with kubectl MTB, then you go into a sub-page which describes in quite a bit of detail the process of downloading and running the benchmarks, right? So where we are right now, and I'll go back and show the list of benchmarks, but this is fairly straightforward to run on any namespace. And the way this has been designed and everything that's working is you basically can create a role within a namespace, run these benchmarks. Initially, you'll get a bunch of fails. And then if you install Gatekeeper OPA or Kyverno policies, which give you the right level of pod security. So as you see, most of these tests are related to pod security. So then you will start getting your test to pass, right? And there's other things like quotas, et cetera. You know, all of the best practices you need from multi-tenancy. So this tool works pretty well. And in fact, we did a demo to SIGOT a few weeks ago, and there was interest in perhaps reusing this also for the replacement to PSPs, which is, like the standardized pod security profiles.
What does that mean? MTB is, I thought MTB is purely client side.
Right, no, but as a way of benchmarking for a level or testing or measuring for a level of conformance to different pod security profiles.
Cool.
Were you referring to the replacing like the CIS benchmarks?
No, this is I think it's called like the standard profile levels for pod security. Right, so this is being proposed within SIGAUT as a possible replacement, or as a way of sort of, as I think in 1.22, PSPs will be deprecated, and at that point, it will be up to tools like Kyverno or Gatekeeper OPA to measure and report on pod security. But potentially, the benchmarking that we're using for MTB could also be an in-cluster tool which anybody can run and say, are they conformant to a level of pod security or not? Because a lot of the checks we're doing here, and these are runtime checks, they're all, they're very much related also to the different security, pod security levels. Yeah, so a few other things that we need to complete to get past our, so going back on the main page where the list of profile level 1 checks are. Here we've, like I mentioned, everything that's complete is more or less related on the security context. There's also some single namespace checks for quotas, limits, things like that. The one area where we need a little bit more discussion and perhaps some feedback on direction is how do we handle things where we want to do behavioral checks across namespaces, right? And the problem there is, with each different variation of how multi-tenancy is handled, there's different ways of creating these namespaces with tools like HNC or even like as we're discussing with Capsule or Loft, or even if you're using just Kyverno and creating namespaces, each one has a slight variation. So we need some general mechanism or perhaps a plugin mechanism to allow for these variations to do tests where we're actually checking if two namespaces can talk to each other or creating namespaces for different tenants. But the plan, so that's a little bit longer term, but the immediate plan, the next thing we're going to wrap up is tests on the storage side. So there it's more like on PVC checks within a single namespace. And then also we will, there's a few others like that came up in discussions with other folks, like this cap drop all is just checking again for pod configurations of which we will add. But as it is right now, this is fairly usable. It's pretty simple. If you haven't tried it out, definitely just go through, if you click on this running link, you'll see there's a video as well as there's steps, detailed instructions on running this on any namespace. We did test this with HNC, so now with some of the, I think, bug fixes that came in the prior release, this works fine with HNC. Everything looks good.
Cool.
Yeah, we haven't tested it yet with virtual clusters, but I don't expect any issues there because they're creating a namespace is just, a regular namespace, but that would be a good kind of milestone as well.
Yeah, I think that the most valuable thing that this can provide is really ensuring isolation, because what HNC does in a way is it breaks down barriers between namespaces, because it's namespaces are the way you isolate the control plane anyway in Kubernetes, but they're too limiting. You don't want to have them completely isolated. So HNC allows you to sort of selectively break the barriers. And it's kind of hard to imagine a general purpose way where you would measure that breaking down of barriers, because all of the features that you're testing right now, they're all features that are part of upstream Kubernetes, and you're just basically testing how they've been set. Whereas things like HNC versus Capsule, there is no agreed upon standard between them.
Right.
And perhaps it's premature, especially if we start talking to the Loft folks and the Kate Spin, and eventually we start to say, well, yeah, let's standardize on HNC, which is at the lowest level, like it's at a lower level than either of those features. And then we can start saying like, okay, so that is the primitive. Does capsule and K-spin use them in the correct way?
Right. Yeah, so if there's a common resource which represents a namespace, or just using a namespace itself with some other mechanism around it, then you're right, we could start, leveraging that as a standard.
Mm-hmm.
The other option, what we're thinking of with MTB, is just to maybe allow a plugin model where, based on the tool that you're using, the user can provide how a namespace gets created. And
Exactly, yeah.
as long as there's some kubectl or some scripting available to create that namespace, then MTB can call out to that and perform checks across multiple namespaces.
Mm-hmm. And that will work as long as the concepts are similar enough.
Right.
Yes.
So
yeah,
the tenancy.
if the matter of the command is different, that's pretty easy. If there's some kind of conceptual difference, that's a little bit harder. Maybe not impossible, but harder.
Yeah, and here all we're concerned about is how do we get the user to give us two namespaces which belong to two different tenants, and and automatically create those namespaces as needed for various checks. So if you can say tenant A, here's a namespace, tenant B, here's a namespace, now we can validate that.
Oh, I see.
You can't talk, you can't have two applications talking to each other or referencing each other directly, right?
Yeah, you could say, okay, or you could just have a setup script. The setup script could be like, the namespaces are called A and B, and in this scenario, they're part of the same tenant, and in this scenario, they're not. Show me what is accessible, because that will depend on all kinds of stuff. For example, if you set up your network policies, maybe you want them to talk, and maybe you don't.
That's exactly, yeah. So, checking that we can run pods in each namespace and they shouldn't be able to talk to each other, or, I guess an advanced case would be even do like DNS lookups and things like that. But those are the sort of checks we want to do across namespaces.
Okay. Yeah, that I can see as being very valuable. Give me a pair of namespaces and tell me how they can interact.
Right.
So.
Hey, Jim.
Yes.
Hey, Jim.
Go ahead.
Can you talk about more about the required cap job for? So what exactly that? This one, because cap job for is pretty powerful. If you do that, it's kind of the container can almost do no communication but compute.
Well, so the best practice that's recommended, and I'll have to pull up some references to it, is to drop everything and then add back the capabilities that are required. So if your container does require a few privilege capabilities, then you can add those in explicitly. The problem is if you don't drop everything, each container runs with a very fairly large set of privileges by default, right? Which are not
by default, there are about 20 some
right.
Yeah, I know because we brought up this question is recently, if you are aware, there is a CVE, which is the network raw capability has a security attack. So I know we are thinking about a solution, how to work around that. I know one solution is drop all and add one by one, but
exactly.
The counter argument is that this is too much work.
Well, but it's probably well worth it, and I think the challenge is detecting which pods and classifying pods. So this is one. So I don't know if folks are familiar with this kubesec.io, but it's pretty good reference for most common pod security level concerns like this. So this is one of the places where they recommend, and it's fairly, even in the Docker community, this is recommended when you're building secure containers. I don't recall offhand if it's a CIS benchmark necessarily, but certainly for pod security, it's recommended.
Yeah, so I understand. Now, my question is, I see the reason. So actually, I don't quite see the reason to put it in MTB, because we MTB start to address security issue? Because if you do that, then a lot more need to be done.
Right. And that's a good question, right? And I think one of the things we need to decide for MTB and is for multi-tenancy, obviously you want pods to have a certain level of security, like you don't want them to access host resources, things like that. But then there are other security concerns which may not directly be related to multi-tenancy, but which are best practices, right? So now, I mean, you could sort of argue that if you don't secure your pods, a malicious user or somebody who accesses the pods could potentially get access to other cluster resources, and that's sufficient reason to secure your pods for multi-tenancy as well. But you're right, it's not directly, promoting multi-tenancy. It's more just a security best practice. So one option there is to just reference the standardized pod security profiles, right? And if those become widely accepted and used, which I think they will, as PSPs are deprecated, at that point we could just say for multi-tenancy, you're required to have, let's say, the restricted profile, which is the highest level of pod security in their definition.
Okay. So
yeah, so
previous one. So what does the let me see. So are you saying that is the require means this is optional?
So yeah, so require would be that we would check for it. Now whether we, how we score, whether we say that that's, is it, again, we have to decide and get some feedback also from folks who are working on some of these pod security profiles for what they recommend. But I think this is one of the discussions I had, I think it was with Rory, who works on some of the security standards. He had recommended adding this in.
So what I'm trying to understand, so if I didn't drop all the capabilities, so will my test fail? So
this would, yeah, so if you're running the benchmarks, the MTB what would happen is this would show up as a as an error or as a failure, right, within your for that particular test. Now the other kind of nuance on this is we have to decide of each one of these tests, just like with CIS, there are some benchmarks they recommend, but they're not scored. Right, so they're saying that, yeah, we highly recommend you do that, but they're not going to count, for multi-tenancy. So we could say it's an unscored test.
Or you have different levels, right? This is, right. This would be the highest level.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there are nuances like that. Yeah, because you're right. I think
those things should be optional. We shouldn't, 100% enforce people to do this, because in my opinion, the otherwise is about isolation. For sure, you need to block it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you didn't block it, you fail it.
Right.
But for others, which not directly correlated to isolation, like security one, this should be just recommendation kind of
right.
thing.
Right. So we could, yeah. So we can still check for it and kind of recommend that as a best practice, but not score it for multi-tenancy. Yeah, I see your point, and I agree with that, right? Because it's not really, I mean, there is an indirect, like I mentioned, again, it could, lead to, I guess, somebody breaking into different tenants if they're running pods in this manner, but it doesn't, in one way or another, directly impact multi-tenancy.
Yeah, okay. There's one more thing, because coming to my mind, so it's random things. So it's about the block use of the host networking. So for this kind of thing, are you checking, is the part using the same IP as a host network? Or are you checking, can the pod ping host?
Yeah, so this is the one you're referring to, right? Host networking and host ports?
Yes.
Yeah, so in this particular check, and you can, when you click on any of these, the actual checks and everything's in here. So if I recall correctly, for this, we're checking for configuration options on the pod spec, right? So we're making sure that this is not configured with host network as true. And then the host ports are also set to nil, right? So that, yeah, and the way this works is we actually do so we run the check, and of course, if we are able to run a pod with that configuration, the test will fail. So then, we apply policies with engines like Kyverno, which will actually block that configuration, right? So that will then prove that, okay, now if you're running, with those right set of policies, you are compliant to these checks.
Okay. Yeah, because I thought you are checking, you probably will do more strict check, like, you do exactly pinning test to see is your CNI is configured correctly, so configured in a way that your pod can never access the host. You see what I'm saying? So you are now, so you are saying that you are checking, nowadays you just do pod spec check with this host network. But in reality, I can do something like I configure my CNI. Now I just install virtual Ethernet to just directly plug into host. So I still can have access to the host.
Sure. So if you have the admin permission to configure a CNI, then of course, yeah, you can do whatever you wish, right? So, but here we're checking more at the user level. And most of these checks, yes, so some will do things at the configuration level, but others will be behavioral, right? So we will try runtime access, depending, like we were discussing, across namespaces, things like that.
Yeah, so that's more about the runtime access thing. Right. So you better just start the pod and try to do some.
Yes, something.
Yeah, if I can just accidentally access somebody else. So make sure, yeah, okay. So you do have,
and if you have some ideas on how to, what exactly that test would look like, let's discuss, because those would be interesting. So we do want to add those tests across namespaces, like we were just previously talking about. But even if there's some way to check for well-known like host resources, things like that, we can add proposed tests for that.
Yeah, because that's the main thing I want to talk about. So since the moment, if I glance all the tests, it seems like configuration based most likely. So what I'm trying to point out is the runtime based is still very important, because now we have a lot of ways to go through this. I mean, all this configuration, like I said, just if the CNI plugin is not configured correctly, you still can, you can do whatever you do.
Right. So some of those, if your cluster is not configured, or if there's some other issues there, then yes. Yeah, so we do, adding some runtime checks, and I think there were a couple here which are more just runtime, so this will actually, try to access, it'll bring up a pod, try to access different things in the cluster, but most of these are more configuration and checking at the pod level for various security best practices.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I wish, we have more and more runtime things. So now, because again, if this becomes the standard, I can say VC pass this test. So we have runtime, so which is much more, I mean, important than the config check, because in the production level, if you want to talk about with hyper level guys, they don't look at your details of implementation. They just say, show me the benchmark results. You have the runtime check.
Sure. Yeah, and that's the frameworks there to start adding those, and that's a lot of the effort was in building the test suite and the way of reporting, etc. So we can add more runtime checks. So let's discuss that.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, good.
Cool. All right. Any other questions or comments, feedback?
And we're at time anyway, so.
All right.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for that update. That was a little bit more involved and interesting than I thought it was going to be. So yeah, Faye, you and I we'll talk over the next couple of weeks. And try to get the law folks involved.
I engage with the people. I think I know.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks everybody. So this meeting will be posted onto YouTube as always, and feel free to reach out on the mailing list or on Slack if there's anything we didn't cover here. Have a good week, everyone.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.